Meteoroid strikes eject precious water from Moon. Researchers from NASA and the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory in Laurel, Maryland, report that streams of meteoroids striking the Moon infuse the thin lunar atmosphere with the short-lived water vapor. The findings will help scientists understand the history of lunar water, a potential resource for sustaining long-term operations on the Moon and human exploration of deep space. Models had predicted that meteoroid impacts could release water from the Moon as a vapor, but scientists hadn't yet observed the phenomenon. Now, the team has found dozens of these events in data collected by NASA's Lunar Atmosphere and Dust Environment Explorer. LADEE was a robotic mission that orbited the Moon to gather detailed information about the structure and composition of the thin lunar atmosphere, and determine whether dust is lofted into the lunar sky. We traced most of these events to known meteoroid streams, but the really surprising part is that we also found evidence of 4 meteoroid streams that were previously undiscovered, said Mehdi Benna of NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland, and the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Benna is the lead author of the study, published in Nature Geosciences. The newly identified meteoroid streams, observed by LADEE, occurred on January 9, April 2, April 5 and April 9, 2014. There's evidence that the Moon has water, H2O, and hydroxyl O, a more reactive relative of H2O. But debates continue about the origins of the water, whether it is widely distributed and how much might be present. The Moon doesn't have significant amounts of H2O or O in its atmosphere most of the time, said Richard Elphick, the LADEE project scientist at NASA's Ames Research Center in California's Silicon Valley. But when the Moon passed through one of these meteoroid streams, enough vapor was ejected for us to detect it. And then, when the event was over, the H2O or O went away. Lunar scientists often use the term water to refer to both H2O and O. Figuring out how much H2O and how much O are present is something future Moon missions might address. LADEE, which was built and managed by NASA's Ames Research Center in California's Silicon Valley, detected the vapor using its neutral mass spectrometer, an instrument built by Goddard. The mission orbited the Moon from October 2013 to April 2014 and gathered detailed information about the structure and composition of the lunar atmosphere, or more correctly, the exosphere, a faint envelope of gases around the Moon. To release water, the meteoroids had to penetrate at least 3 inches (8 centimeters) below the surface. Underneath this bone-dry top layer lies a thin transition layer, then a hydrated layer, where water molecules likely stick to bits of soil and rock, called regolith. From the measurements of water in the exosphere, the researchers calculated that the hydrated layer has a water concentration of about 200 to 500 parts per million, or about 0.02 to 0.05% by weight. This concentration is much drier than the driest terrestrial soil, and is consistent with earlier studies. It is so dry that one would need to process more than a metric ton of regolith in order to collect 16 ounces of water. Because the material on the lunar surface is fluffy, even a meteoroid that's a fraction of an inch (5 millimeters) across can penetrate far enough to release a puff of vapor. With each impact, a small shock wave fans out and ejects water from the surrounding area. When a stream of meteoroids rains down on the lunar surface, the liberated water will enter the exosphere and spread through it. About 2/3 of that vapor escapes into space, but about 1/3 lands back on the surface of the Moon. These findings could help explain the deposits of ice in cold traps in the dark reaches of craters near the poles. Most of the known water on the Moon is located in cold traps, where temperatures are so low that water vapor and other volatiles that encounter the surface will remain stable for a very long time, perhaps up to several billion years. Meteoroid strikes can transport water both into and out of cold traps. The team ruled out the possibility that all of the water detected came from the meteoroids themselves. We know that some of the water must be coming from the Moon, because the mass of water being released is greater than the water mass within the meteoroids coming in, said the second author of the paper, Dana Hurley of the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory. The analysis indicates that meteoroid impacts release water faster than it can be produced from reactions that occur when the solar wind hits the lunar surface. The water being lost is likely ancient, either dating back to the formation of the Moon or deposited early in its history, said Benna. NASA is leading a sustainable return to the Moon with commercial and international partners to expand human presence in space and bring back new knowledge and opportunities. Calculating temperature inside Moon to help reveal its inner structure. Little is known about the inner structure of the Moon, but a major step forward was made by a University of Rhode Island scientist who conducted experiments that enabled her to determine the temperature at the boundary of the Moon's core and mantle. She found the temperature to be between 1,300 and 1,470 degrees Celsius, which is at the high end of an 800-degree range that previous scientists had determined. In order to understand the interior structure of the Moon today, we needed to nail down the thermal state better, said Ananya Malik, a URI assistant professor of geosciences who joined the university faculty in December 2018. Now we have the two anchor points, the core mantle boundary and the surface temperature measured by Apollo, and that will help us create a temperature profile through the Moon. We need that temperature profile to determine the internal state, structure and composition of the Moon. The surface temperature of the Moon is approximately -20 C. According to Malik, the Moon has an iron core, like that of Earth, and previous research using seismic data had found that between 5 and 30% of the material at the boundary of the core and mantle was in a liquid or molten state. The big question is, why would we have some melt present in the Moon at that depth, Malik said. To begin to answer this question, Malik conducted a series of experiments in 2016 at the Bavarian Research Institute of Experimental Geochemistry and Geophysics in Germany using a multi-anvil device that can exert the high pressures found deep inside the Moon. She prepared a tiny sample of material similar to that found on the Moon, squeezed it in the device at 45,000 times the Earth's atmospheric pressure, which is the pressure believed to exist at the Moon's core mantle boundary, and used a graphite heater to raise the temperature of the sample until it partially melted. The goal was to determine what temperature range would produce a 5 to 30% melt, which would tell us the temperature range of the core mantle boundary, she said. Now that the temperature range at the boundary has been narrowed, scientists can begin to develop a more precise temperature profile of the Moon and proceed to determine a profile of the minerals that make up the mantle from its crust to its core. It's important that we know the composition of the Moon to better understand why it has evolved as it has, Malik said. The histories of the Earth and Moon have been intertwined since the beginning. In fact, both are the product of a great collision between proto-Earth and an approximately Mars-sized body that occurred over 4.5 billion years ago. So to understand our Earth better, we have to know our nearest neighbor because we all had a common start. Earth is complicated, she continued. Any similarity in the composition between Earth and the Moon can give us insight into how these two planetary bodies were formed, what were the energetics of the collision, and how elements were partitioned between them. The URI geoscientist noted that Earth has evolved through the process of plate tectonics, which is responsible for the distribution of the continents, the topography of Earth's surface, the regulation of long-term climate, and perhaps even the origin of life. But there is no evidence of plate tectonics on the Moon. Everything on Earth happens because of plate tectonics, she said. What does this tell us about our own planet when the Moon doesn't experience this process? It's the same argument for why we study Mars and Venus. They are our next closest neighbors, and we all had a common start, but why are they so different from our planet? The next steps in Malik's research will involve experimentally determining the density of the molten material at the core mantle boundary, which will further refine the temperature range. In collaboration with Heidi Fuqua-Haviland at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center and Paul Bremner at the University of Florida, she will then combine these results with computational methods to derive the temperature profile and composition of the interior of the Moon.